Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. Okay, on the show today, Jessica Dibb, so head of the conference. Jessica Dibb, who is the founder and spiritual director of the Inspirational Consciousness School, and also is co-director of the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance. Many teachers at many places like Kripalu, is that how it's pronounced? I know it's quite one of those. Kripalu, that's it. Omega, and comes highly recommended to me. I wanted to get to know her a little bit myself ahead of the conference. So, Jessica, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's really a delight and actually an honor. I just came across your work a few years ago, and I've always meant to be in touch with you because the embodiment piece is so critical for the healing of our species and being able to keep this, have this world literally survive. So I just feel like this is divine providence here.
Well, it's certainly a pleasure. And it looks lovely where you are in Maryland, right? And I can hear the birds and this beautiful tree behind you. It looks absolutely gorgeous. Looks like a nice location.
Yeah, this is where Inspiration Consciousness School is. And when it was founded, 25 or more years ago, I felt deeply that I had a lot of friends, and myself included, that had spent time in ashrams, had spent time in places of deep, intensive spiritual study. And my feeling was that I wanted to create such a place that was ecumenical, where atheists and agnostics and people of every faith, and also just their own emergent spirituality, could come and then, go back, like just immediately go back to their, plumbing that they do, or their walking through the hospital floors of Johns Hopkins, being a researcher or a doctor, and that we would do the kind of intensive, mystical, embodied work that would be done, in a Tibetan monastery, but do it right here in, the midst of daily life. And so somehow this beautiful place showed up right here in the middle of Maryland, just outside of Baltimore.
I'd love to find out a bit more about you and how you kind of got there. So where did this all start for you, Jessica? What was the time when you thought, what was the beginning of your journey?
Well, Mark, I would like to say that the beginning of all of our journeys is when we take that first breath. And I think I'm not just being metaphorical. The more that we learn about the science, of course, we know just even metaphorically that with our breath, without breath, nothing else happens. And what we're learning is that memory, as you know from your embodiment work, is encoded. And so literally the quality of our first breath, our internal and external environment, all of it makes a difference, and we can continuously reset. So I actually feel that from a very young age, I remember experiencing, like I would look at someone like you or my mother or my father or my brothers and sisters, my friends, my teachers, and I would feel like every person really just wanted to experience being love, like they wanted to give love, to receive love, to be love, and that love wanted to be given in some unique, creative way, whether it was through baking bread or plumbing or, discovering something or, whatever it was that they were doing. And I remember feeling really sad because I could see that we were afraid and that we didn't have permission, in a sense, to be wildly alive. So it really began back there for me. And I took this very beautiful kind of pilgrimage, grail kind of journey throughout my life where, first I thought it would be ballet. It was so beautiful. I was lit up with it. And I thought, well, the world just needs beauty. So I kind of went a deep dive into that in New York City and dancing with the Royal Ballet, the Bolshoi Ballet. It was really deeply part of my soul. but I saw eventually that it wasn't going to speak to enough people. And so I think that's when I really started to feel like, what is it that could speak to everyone? What would be that unifying possibility? Because everyone is this unique emanation of this incredible love that I'm seeing within everybody. And so, for a while I went I lived in India for 6 months and pilgrimage there. I lived in an ashram for 4 years. I then was a pre-med major at the University of California at Irvine. I wanted to be a doctor because I felt like if I got that credential, then I could, practice all these other things with people that I was learning. And then I had my son, and I had him when I was quite young in college. And I realized that, there was no way I was going to go to medical school while he was a little boy, and because he would only have that one time period with me. And somehow in the midst of all of that, I just had this epiphany that it was something about the breath. And I had been practicing pranayama for years and years and years, and through yoga and all my deep yoga practices in the ashram. But I did this breath work with a psychologist of these kind of deeper soul level breathings where you really open up to the depth of your potential. And I just saw in a kind of almost like eureka moment that this was something everybody had access to. It was our greatest treasure. It was right within our own chest. And I just remember sort of going on this search for how we could make that accessible and available to everybody to know the power of conscious breathing. And I wanted people to be able to not have to leave their lives or think that it was something that was a fringe thing. And so this Inspiration Consciousness School grew up out of that, and it's a deep bow to all the beings that have ever contributed to consciousness and embodiment and breath and awakening and all of that. We're constantly taking in, from everybody past, present, and future, and trying to create a place here where, again, regardless of a person's any kind of spiritual orientation, including atheism, they can feel that they can feel that they themselves are a unique contribution to the planet, and that we can create the conditions where they are free, literally, to explore whatever they need to, so that they can awaken those latent potentials.
Okay, so we just moved inside there, Jessica. The birds were very beautiful, but a little bit loud. So if listeners might notice, it's got quieter. So you were talking about your sort of background there. Tell us more about the breath work. What kind of breath work do you enjoy teaching?
I really honor the entire field of breathwork. Breathwork is a spectrum of practices that goes from sort of simple reset kind of breathing that resets cortisol, produces relaxation, stimulates polyvagal function and all of that, to awareness practices that build capacity for focus and also for letting go of what is actually not needed, and of inhabiting and embodying what we're doing, to therapeutic modalities that are actually meant to do things like heal specific physical ailments or emotional imbalances, even trauma, to things that are actually meant to cultivate like qualities of a human being, like compassion, open-heartedness, strength, power, these things were these very deep, kind of like a lot of the Buddhist stuff. And then at the far end of the spectrum, we have these breathwork practices that, they all have a similar feature, whether what I do is called integrative breathwork, and I can explain a little bit about that, but also like holotropic breathwork, rebirthing, liberation breathing, vibration, therapeutic breathwork, all biodynamic breathwork, all of those kinds of breathworks are a kind of allowing the breath to unwind all of the places in our psyche, our body, our heart, our awareness and our spirit that are bound from either fear or trauma or just unattended emotional needs, unattended physical needs, and then energize the life urge, the life force in the body, in the heart, in awareness, and in the spirit. And so that's I use all of the breath work. I use all of the field of the whole spectrum of practices for people. And when we really want to do the deep transformational work, we'll go to integrative breathwork.
Okay, so you want to tell us a little bit about that particular modality?
Yeah. So, building on the great giants of the 20th century that kind of rediscovered the power of breath, people like Leonard Orr and Stan Grof and others, and began to shape it in a way that could address the multidimensionality of human beings, which is, I think, one of the things that ails us the most, is that we try to live these lives that are productive, but the production is in a very narrow band. And so we're sort of we're kind of homesick for all of these deeper and more the imaginal realm, the soul level realm, and even embodiment, as you've been a big proponent of. Like, we've really created a schism, a split between awareness, self, soma, psyche, soul, and soma. And this is one of the greatest tragedies. So for me, building on things that all these people did during the 20th century, I'm really seeing how if we bring together the great wisdom down through the ages of these lineages that really helped people build within themselves an infrastructure, if you will, a body, a nervous system, a heart, a relaxed and open and available heart, pure awareness, big mind. If we could bring together the cultivation and development, the awareness of how to do that with a human being, with the power of this deep integrative breathing, we could embody more quickly these states of consciousness in a lived life. And so for me, why I call it integrative breathwork is that it's not like a particular technique. We give people a few guidelines when they go into the breath. And then our task is to find the life urge in that person, to have them find the life urge, and then to kind of midwife that life urge to be the healer and keep on moving through the different layers of things that need to be attended to at the emotional, physical, cognitive, and spiritual level. And so I love the fact that there is somatic intelligence, and you're a big proponent of that. Like, we've really underestimated that. I think it's equivalent to emotional intelligence. And so there is emotional intelligence, and there's awareness, pure awareness, and cognitive intelligence. And then there is, of course, the dimension of, let's just say, spirit or soul or essence, or whatever that you'd like to call it. And I think that what we try to do with breath work is have people access those non-ordinary states of consciousness that happen, in those deeper realms. And we have them experience simultaneously to really stay in the body, to not leave the body while these things are happening, so that the nervous system and the body become this finely tuned vehicle for non-ordinary states of consciousness, which I believe is needed for the human species to make a kind of the kinds of quantum shifts that we need to make in order to care for everybody, to address inequities, oppression, and most of all, of course, to realize our essential intrinsic belonging to the planet, and to be able to develop and create the ways of relating to the planet and each other that are going to just make all the potential that we are possible and not take down 200 species a day with us the way we've been doing. So integrative breathwork is this deep kind of connected breathing that finds the life force in that person. And then they are supported by the breathworker. Integrated breathworkers are, by the way, highly trained people. We have psychotherapists, for instance, that do our course that say the work is far more rigorous, and the breathworker trained anywhere from 3 to 7 years. And so they're trained to travel with the psyche, whether it's trauma, emotional imbalance, depression, potential need, whatever it may be. They're trained to work with very distinctive and differentiated kinds of mystical experiences, non-ordinary states of consciousness experiences, things that people have yearned for, throughout time. They're trained to really facilitate people in staying very in touch with their body and during the breath work, so that they're reading the body in the same way that they might after 10 or 15 years of mindfulness meditation, where you can literally feel minute things in the body. And also to connect cognitive awareness, like how does this actually change our orientation towards self, other, and the world? And we basically just let it rip, doing with all of those things happening, and really trust. I like to say that Jesus was not a Christian and Buddha wasn't really a Buddhist. These are people that had spontaneous experiences of contact with the primordial force, with the Big Bang, with, whatever it is, and their unique emanation in it. And so I think there are 7.5 billion paths of awakening on the planet, and we're just trying to serve that.
That's a lot of years of training. What are you doing in all that time? I'd love to sort of drill down a little bit in that, because often breathwork schools, they teach a technique, you breathe in, you breathe out, that's really thorough.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, Mark, I really feel, this is something, because I just love all of the people that are in love with breath. Breath has found them, however they're doing it. They have a love of breath, and I honor the passion, with which all of these people are wanting to bring the potency and the efficacy, and also just the accessibility to the human species. So, and what I have felt has been a shadow in the breathwork field. Kind of initially there was it was like in America, we would call it maybe the Wild West, but it was like, there was this discovery, and it was like finding fire. And it was, it was also still when there was a kind of a hippie feel to the whole, to the world and all of that. And so I just honor the explosive energy and the courageousness of people, that did all of that were willing to explore the things that were coming up, from conception and birth and childhood and present day and, God and all of it. I started to feel at some point, with all of the beauty of that, there was a kind of a shadow in the breathwork movement that I think sometimes turns off what I'm going to call more sophisticated seekers, who have a sense about the delicacy, the nuance, of what it takes to actually build a vehicle that, might be called in the ancient literature, literally a vehicle of light, like a body, heart, awareness of capacity to receive the all that is. And I think it's because there's so much letting go in breathwork, and there's such a sense of well-being that happens, any kind of breathing you do. And there's such a sense, too, of kind of breakthrough in the same way that psychedelics can do that. You break through and you have these experiences, and that those three things are very compelling for people. The letting go of of grief and trauma and hurt and pain, the breakthrough experiences of non-ordinary states of consciousness, and just feeling good, when so many of us haven't felt good. That I think the slight shadow has been the lack of understanding of what it actually takes to build that being that becomes a capacitor for the deepest levels of consciousness in every moment. You think about like Yo-Yo Ma, the great cellist, or, Ishtar Perlman, yes, they had a gift, but any of them will tell you they practice. Their life is basically like practicing, 4, 6, 8 hours a day, even after they become the world-class, most famous, whatever of. And so I feel like I'm really feeling a call to bring that into the breathwork field. Here we sit with what I'm going to, I hope it doesn't feel arrogant or bombastic, but just people can feel the simple truth of this. We sit here, all of us, not just breathworkers, but all of us sit here with the most profound nutrient, medicine, friend, and awakener right in our own bodies, right in every moment of our own life. And so for me, training, I think the breathworkers that I train, they go through years and years of personal development, their own work. I mean, the basic, the most important part of their training is themselves, the development of themselves. They get psychodynamic training, equivalent to what they might get in social work school or, psychotherapy courses of study. They study spiritual, mystical states in a very sort of concrete way, and they have to have a facility, for instance, with both emptiness and devotion and non-being and being, fullness and expression and impermanence and all of the permutations that come from that. Because otherwise what happens is if what we really want to do is bring to the human species the power of this medicine and nutrient for their own lives, and then for their relational lives, and then for the collective, we have to be able to present the breath work in a way that leaves room for all of the different aspects of awakening and the different temperaments that come to it. Some people are much more resonant with the idea of impermanence and emptiness, and some with love and devotion and all of that. And I don't want to shape that for anybody. So all of our practitioners have to become comfortable with all of that and not have projections where they're needing their clients to go a certain way or where they're inducting them into a certain thing. And so when you just put all of that together, and we watch them do sessions for a long time. Now they're practicing. When I say that, the training is 3 to 7 years, after about, they're taking clients in there. And so there's a gradation. It's just when they get their permanent certification, which is also the international certification that we give through the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance now, which my co-director, Jim Morningstar, is also speaking on this conference, the Embodiment Conference. That's the kind of training that they've gone through, honestly,
Break from the interview to tell you about our shop and a deal we've got on there, and also about some events that are coming up. So if you go to Embodied Facilitator /shop and use the code podcast50 podcast50 is the code. You can get 50% off anything in the shop. And what have we got on there? How to design training, trauma for facilitators, breathwork, leadership, resilience, life purpose. There's a bunch of books, there's a bunch of e-courses, mostly for facilitators, trainers, coaches, yogis, different ebooks. But that code will give you 50% out off anything at all there in the shop. So that could save you, let's say, up to £100, which is about $120. So well worth having that code. Go to embodiedfacilitator.com/shop. Also on that website, you will see embodiedfacilitator.com/events-calendar. Just look under events under the main title. You'll see all the stuff we've got coming up for events. We regularly have free online events. If you're interested in embodiment, we have them on coaching, life purpose, marketing, all trauma, all sorts of things. So have a look at the events page. You can see the different one-day events we've got coming up related to the conference and all kinds of other stuff. Okay, so all of that is on embodiedfacilitator.com. And remember that code there. That code is podcast50 if you want 50% off anything. There you go. A good deal. Back to the interview. So this Breathworker Alliance, why did that get set up? What's the history of that? It seems like we're on sort of Breathwork 2.0 now, or maybe 3.0 or something else, depending on how we do it. But there was, as you say, this history of the kind of pioneers in the 60s and 70s, this very kind of, intense and sort of state pumping kind of Wild West a little bit. And now we're seeing, scientific research. We're seeing sort of different schools comparing. And we're also seeing people just rediscovering this, people just rediscovering breathwork. It seems to be kind of in vogue. What is this Breathwork Alliance? How did that get started?
Beautiful. Yeah, I just wanted to say I was listening to one of your things about embodiment. You were going like hashtag embodiment. It's like everywhere, it's sort of trending and of course breathwork too. But, I said that in 2012 at our first breath immersion conference from the science to the samadhi. In 2013, I said, sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, breathwork's going to just explode, and it's going to be because it's for everybody. It's for everybody. So in 2001, Jim Morningstar and had a panel at a global inspiration conference with myself and Tav Sparks, who was Stan Groff's right-hand man. He passed recently, and people that are listening may have known of Tav, and he was a stellar, exquisite human being that really contributed to our understanding of the inner dimensions. And then Gay Hendricks, who's a psychologist. And a lot of what we were talking about was the wisdom in finding a way to have training for breath workers be more complete and more grounded and more connected to a wisdom. And there were 60 amazing breath workers there, and they gave Jim and I a kind of vote of confidence to begin this organization. And we had data. Jim collected data from 21 schools around the planet about what their training program was and what their ethics were. By the way, I'm a great believer in naming the shadows so that things get better. And, that was one of the problems in the early breathwork movement too, is that there were...
And what was that specifically? Sort of sexual stuff, financial stuff? I mean, I guess like anything where there's a high that people associate that state with the person and not the practice, right? And then it's very easy once that attachment's been made for someone to take advantage of that.
You've got it, Mark, of course. And that of course happened, and so there were sexual boundaries that were crossed. There were financial boundaries, I think, that were crossed. And we just, and there was also just like, we didn't want the whole guru development guru thing to be going on through the breathwork movement. So anyway, over the next 2 years, I helped develop a set of ethics in conjunction with some other beautiful breathworkers on the planet. I was very honored to, kind of spearhead that. And we created not only a really wonderful set of ethics for all breathworkers, but we created a kind of restoration. If you know about restorative justice, like if somebody was going off the rails, how would we not excommunicate them and cancel them?
Right. Well, that's supposed to, yeah.
No cancel culture here because we have to redeem everybody somehow. But how could we restore them so that they were contributing? So we have a whole process that we go through with that as well.
Can I jump on that? I'm going to jump in if I may, because this is quite rare and unusual. That ethics is, some places don't have any ethics. Then the normal approach is if you break these rules, you're out, which is better than nothing and can keep people safe. And, that can be useful. But then there isn't often this conversation of redemption. Like, how do people get back? Right. So like someone slips up or, even worse, someone has a track record over years.
Yes.
What's their route back to being a teacher again? Or is that barred for them? Like, how does that work in terms of you're very encouraged to hear that there's an alternative to simply sort of canceling people and dehumanizing them that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Mark, wouldn't we love to live in the world where I just want to say, I believe this is possible. I don't know whether we're 5 years away or 50 or 500, but I believe that when human beings are able to embody their full potential and consciousness, we will have the collective wisdom of how to relate to even psychopaths, for instance, in a way that brings value to their lives in a way that they can contribute. Because at the heart, when I said everybody wants to be loved, another way that I could have said that is everybody wants to feel like their life has meaning, it has purpose. And so, these are secrets that can be unlocked, and it's going to take all of us working together. So, this is my attempt towards that orientation. Restorative justice is it's an idea that was championed by, for instance, Bo Lozoff, who started the Prison Ashram Project with Ram Dass's, support and even a financial grant, and has affected hundreds of thousands of prisoners around the world. What we have is we have a 5-step process. So we ask breathworkers to sign on to the ethics if they want to have the global professional certification. And we ask, the first step is for them to become aware that they've made a breach. And if they are aware of that and they can correct it themselves, so it's a self-awareness piece, then we encourage them to do that and then to share with another human being, kind of like a 12-step thing, somebody who has some wisdom in the breathwork field that they've done that. If that isn't happening and the client becomes aware that a breach has happened, and they can bring it to that breathworker, and if they cannot get satisfaction or get a healing that they need, they can take it to a group like that person's teacher or a group of breathworkers, or even to the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance. The breathworker who's needing to restore themselves and not have their gifts get thrown away, can also at that level, at step 2, they can acknowledge and realize and go into a healing process with that person. The third step has to do with if a group of breathworkers or a breathworker becomes aware that someone else is doing something that is not in client's best interest, they can go to that breathworker. And then if they are not able to make any headway, they can create a community of breathworkers, and there can be an intervention. The intervention would have to do with community building. It would have to do with kind of like alternative dispute resolution that has been championed actually right here in the state of Maryland, where sometimes even criminal activities are not adjudicated, but they are brought to a community conferencing, and the police and the person who did the thing and the family and the victim and all of that sit together and keep talking, kind of like a Quaker thing, until they can figure out how restoration could be made outside of the jail system.
I come across this in the slums of Brazil when I was working there, some called restorative circles, restorative justice. There's a sort of whole movement around this.
Yes. Well,
radical alternative. Yeah.
Well, we have a beautiful woman here in Maryland, Rachel Wohl, who was the first. She directed the Alternative Dispute Resolution Council and created this whole process, and now teaches nationally and all of that. But at any rate, so we can do that in the field of breathwork. We can create a community process. And then, of course, in that community process, my experience of it is that recommendations are made, like, here's what you would need to do. And it might involve, I have had one practitioner, for instance, who was a psychologist, who, fortunately, it had nothing to do with our school, but, there was a breach with a psychology person, but they were in training for breath work. And we had to ask them to step away from it and go through all of these self-evaluation, therapy, trauma stuff with themselves. Sometimes there's amends to the person if that person, so it could be highly creative. We don't know what it's going to be. Certain practices, mentoring, people, having to meet with us periodically. And then, of course, if we cannot make any headway that way, the last step would be that we bring in outside mediation of some kind. We go to some kind of, professional, not just mediation, but supervision, and get some kind of, help that way. But we've never had to do that. And I'm happy to say, I'm happy to be forthright about it, that even some breath workers who were a little loose and, whatever, have really come around. And I can say that the healing process really works. Yeah. So
that's really encouraging to hear, Jessica. It's lovely that you're doing that. And, it's interesting. I think we're getting into a world of governing bodies, and that could be a step back and be very restrictive, or it could be a step forward. And this very much feels like the latter, as different yoga or, martial arts, as different. I've seen it be a step back in certain communities where it feels just like restrictive and government rules and power plays. People in Europe, there's certain countries where you can't teach aikido or can't teach yoga unless you sign up for certain things. And in other places, it feels like, wow, okay, this is really a step forward.
Well, Mark, I think that's an incredibly astute observation on your part. And I remember I actually wrote a letter or, an essay to the breathwork world back in 2002 or 3. And I said, listen, our greatest challenge is going to be that here we hold a medicine that is, we see spontaneous healings. I've seen, sorry, but it's true. I've seen tumors just disappear. We've seen people have a direct contact with God with no intermediary. People heal, people embody, people, so here we have this profound medicine. And our greatest challenge over the next decade or two is going to be, how do we keep the profundity of that medicine without dumbing it down and still make it relevant and accessible to mainstream and professional culture? So the development of professional breathwork that is not a dumbed down version of breathwork was there for me since 2002. And it's one of the things I've just had to really hold, in all of the settings, all of the meetings, all of the conferences. We cannot sacrifice one or the other. And I think it's a great model. I think we're making our way. And I'm very proud every day of just different little breath workers I hear about throughout the world. We're holding different pieces in ethical ways, or, realizing they contact the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance if they want to be certified, and how do they need to transform their training a little bit so that it fits the standards. I am so heartened. I think we're going to, God willing, inshallah, as they say, we are going to pull this off, where we are going to have the full-blown form of breathwork in therapeutic settings, professional, ethical grounding. And in fact, I'm writing a book right now about integrating breathwork into psychotherapy, and it's close to being done. And so I'm really happy about this.
Wonderful. It sounds like a great book. It's sometimes I feel sad that the sort of therapists don't necessarily know about these somatic tools. There's such centering tools from my background, or breathwork tools, that can be quite straightforward for people to learn, and can be integrated into other more cognitive approaches. Listen, Jessica, I wanted to ask you. I kind of wanted to get this in earlier. you orientate around spirituality. When I first sort of saw I heard nice things about you, and I looked up your website and it said inspiration consciousness, and I thought, oh no, not one of those spiritual people, and then I was like, oh, no, it looks like she's deep into breath work and the body. And sometimes the people who are into kind of consciousness and altered states and spirituality, sometimes they're more about getting away from the body. That's their thing. That's their trip, right? Get away from the body. The body's we're in a piece of meat. That's the real deal is we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, So, pleasantly surprised not to hear that at all. Maybe you could speak a little bit to that. So some of the people who are more spiritually inclined or consciousness inclined, is there a trap there around disembodiment? How does embodiment help? I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about that before we wrap up.
Mark, this is why I was so looking. That's one of the reasons I was so looking forward to connecting with you, because as soon as I heard about the work you were doing, again, I think it was about 3 years ago, it's like, yeah, he's picked up on that piece. It's so, to me, this is actually, so let me, I'll take 5 minutes here to download this. I think that in terms of awareness about human potential, we had sort of the ages where we lived, we understood there was like connection with divinity, or, and if you don't have to think of it that way, because it's just the Big Bang is so awesome, right? Like, that's it, the Big Bang. The force, love, call it what you want. God, I don't really care. There's something incredible, and we are that. You and I were in the Big Bang, the air we're breathing, everything was one. That is not a mystical concept. It's an actual physical concept. Somehow in the development of the neocortex, and I don't think it's a bad thing, I think it's actually a development of evolution, we experience the sense of separation from the fact that literally our bodies are the very stuff that that the universe was born from, that was created from. And so I think that, we came down through the Age of Enlightenment, where there was all this awakening then around philosophy and thinking and understanding. And then Freud issued in kind of the age of like emotion, and that mattered. And we are now finally at the place of having to awaken embodiment, which is the healing that really needs to happen. There is all kinds of abuse on this planet. There's physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, religious abuse, spiritual abuse. In my opinion, the deepest part of spiritual abuse is that you are telling a human being that there is some higher power that is not them, that is not in their own body.
Profoundly disempowering.
Disempowering. And on top of it being profoundly disempowering, it's profoundly limiting of what our potential is. Because what I want to say is, the Big Bang and God, love, the force, whatever you want to call it, it's rippling out through the universe. And this is its child. This is it. This is this is consciousness. This is consciousness's greatest creation, in a sense, is you, me, that deer, the atom of air. And to be separated from that, to be told that there's an intermediary, a priest, a religion, a set of beliefs, that it's something outside of yourself, is the setup for, and someday we'll get away from this hell and we'll transcend to whatever, and it'll all be better. And this allows the great shadow that we don't have the potential to heal suffering, that we don't have the potential to co-create a world in which all beings can thrive. This has to be healed. The bringing together of consciousness and the experience of it in the body and in every little daily action is actually the way out of the dilemma that we've created. It's the way to wholeness. So I could go on forever about that. This is it. This is the thing. Yeah.
Jessica, that is, I think, a beautiful place to start to wrap up here. It's a pleasure to meet you. A pleasure to meet you. Nice to make your acquaintance, to be a little bit British and old-fashioned. But I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed hearing what you're doing practically around the Breathworkers Association and that approach to ethics. I'm sure there's loads more, so people will be tuning into, no doubt, at the Embodiment Conference. Where else can they find you on the internet, Jessica, if they want to look you up?
Well, the Consciousness School is inspirationcommunity.org, and the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance is breathworkalliance.com.
Great. Breathworkalliance.com and inspirationcommunity.org. All right. So you've reminded me to text my mum as well, which is, I do appreciate, actually, because I'm so busy with the conference.
Your mom's going to appreciate that too.
Well, I love my mum. I do love my mum. And I've been neglecting my mum lately with the conference. There's no point, I really think there's no point doing any big work in the world if you forget your mum and your wife and your niece and all those, the people in our lives that were dear to us. So, yeah, I'm going to do that in a minute.
I love that you're saying that, Mark, because it's kind of akin to the fact that, what is all this stuff we're doing if we're forgetting our Mother Earth, And
Nice. Yeah.
And I will just say that they say that men who love their mothers make the best partners. So,
it's a very good first date question is to ask someone, what do you think of your mum or dad, depending on your preference. And if they like them too much or not enough, then I think there's a healthy middle ground, Okay, and closing message about the body, Jessica, to finish us off today.
Well, first of all, Mark, let me say what you're doing, the fact that you realized how important this somatic intelligence is as an intrinsic, not a supportive. It's literally 1/4 of our intelligence, emotional intelligence, somatic intelligence, cognitive intelligence, and then imaginal or consciousness, intelligence. It's so beautiful. And I know that this has been a gargantuan task to pull together 1,000 teachers to do this massive embodiment conference. And it's coming at a great time on our planet. So I just really want to honor your vision and your work. And I feel really grateful to be a part of it. And I will just say again that, we have a teaching in our school that goes like this. I am you and you are me, and I am everything and you are everything. And this everything is trying to find a way to express itself uniquely through the unique form that it created in each one of us. It is possible for a human being to awaken. There are those that have done it, and every one of them tells us that we can all do it. And it is possible for a human being to express their deepest potential. And there are those that have done it, and they've told us we can all do it. And the bringing together, the using of conscious breathing to heal all the intrapsychic splits of body, heart, head, and spirit is a way to have a lived experience of that truth, because the air that I breathe has been breathed by everybody, and the air that you breathe has been breathed by everybody. And the molecular memory, just like the cellular memory of all the wisdom and the shadows and all of it that has ever been, and the potentials, is right there in our breath. So it has to be in the body, or it's still going to be fractured. And I do want to just end by saying, Mark, that Rumi was very clear about this. And I think Rumi's a great person to bring in here because, he was a great mystic, but he also, he had deep respect, not just for the Sufi and Muslim tradition that he was a part of, but for Christianity and Judaism. He wrote poems about Buddha and Christ and everybody, Muhammad. And he has this one poem where he says this. I'm going to shorten it and paraphrase it a little bit. Not Sufi, not Zen, not Muslim, not Christian, not Jewish, not Hindu, not any religion. I am not from down in the ground, nor am I from up in the sky. I am not from any place. My place is placeless. a trace of the traceless. I have seen the two worlds as one, and that one call to and know as first, last, outer, inner, breath, breathing human being.
Jessica Dibb, thank you so much. Beautiful and encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Embodiment Podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment Podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator Course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you.